Columbus doesn't get such good play today in America. Okay, and this is the 20th class. This means that this is the 24th class. Well, that's actually, there's a 25th because we did the Kitnios one, but now we've been going 24 straight weeks. So that's 6 months. Let's hope that, well, we can continue. But the reason it started, of course, with the book was because we were really stuck at home. But we've done a lot, and we have more great stuff today. Let me just respond to a few things here, a number of things. I don't know if I don't like to go more than 10 or at most 15 minutes before we move on, but many people wrote to me. For those who wanted to know where the Gemara speaks about Kedas Moshe Yisrael, that it means that that the Chazal can be uproot marriages. That's what it means. It's in the Tosas Kesubos Gimel Amud Aleph. For those who asked me, or one of you asked me, where does the Gemara, where's this drasha that women are not counted as witnesses? That I said, according to the Rambam, even a based in that's less can do that. Well, you can find this on Shavuos, Masechet Shavuot 30a. You can see the drasha right there where the Gemara derives it, that it's men, not women. Comments from Eli, I think it's Eli or not Eli, Eli Turkel. I think it's also Turkel, not Turkel, Turkel, rabbi, mathematician. I'm sure there are people here who know him. Right. Just a couple of things he mentioned. First of all, he claims that I mentioned last class that I think the Rambam is like the most progressive of the medievals when it comes to women. Even, ironically, people don't realize that. He told me that Professor Grossman says Rashi is the most pro-woman of the Rishonim. Okay. In terms of God not knowing the future, he points out that Professor Nathan Aviezer, has an article about this whole thing. I actually cite that article in my book, Limits of Orthodox Theology. I refer to that. We saw last week about wearing earrings. You know, is that considered a wounding? Chavala, and Rav Lassin's point, and I quoted Rav Mazuz, who says he doesn't get it. Why it's even a question? Because we saw in Chumash that they did it, in the Navi. Eli says it's not a good proof because maybe they didn't make holes in their ears for the earrings. They were just clip-ons. I don't know. Did they have clip-ons in ancient days? I'm not sure. He quotes a number of other interesting things. We mentioned, Eli, about that witnesses that Bate Dinim in Israel do take women because you sign a form giving judges leeway to do pshara. I didn't mention that, but we said that. He mentions that there's some rabbis who don't want women to do with bedikas chametz because they think they're lazy. That's an example, I guess, of these negative views. But the real issue I want to mention is I said something, and he's a mathematician, so I can't challenge this. I don't know if we have any other mathematicians. I said that in most shuls, you have more Kohanim than Levim. And there should be many more Levim than Kohanim, because Levi, it's one tribe. It's a tribe, and Kohen, it's just a family. And he even points out that in the desert, there were a ratio of about 6,000 to 1. Kohanim to Levim. But he says as follows, that I'm incorrect, because the census of the Jews in the desert has little correlation with the number of children, etc. Over thousands of years, the influence of the initial distribution is negligible. See chaos theory. Well, being that I know nothing about chaos theory, I wrote back to him, and he explained it all about how over time that these initial, just because you start with a large group, it doesn't mean it remains a large group, as well as he acknowledges what I said, that Kohanim kept their yichus. Even on tombstones, we see that Levim didn't, but certain systems, a tiny change at the beginning can have a huge effect, and et cetera, et cetera. So any mathematicians, you can explore it if you want with Eli about chaos theory and how, at least my Balabatish understanding, that just because thousands of years ago you have many, many more Levim, it doesn't mean anything. One of you asked, I said that in Jerba they go to school on Shabbos. How do you go to school on Shabbos? Well, why can't you go to school on Shabbos? That they don't, right? After lunch, they all return back to the yeshiva. And the boys go to school. The girls have like groups. They go back to this, so they learn for the next few hours. We can't do that because we don't live within walking distance. But if everything's within walking distance, learning Torah doesn't take a vacation on Shabbos. You don't need to sleep if you're a young person. Two more things. Reb Aryeh in Israel wanted to. I said as follows, and this language you find elsewhere as well. That I said that Reb Chaim was not makpid, Reb Chaim Soloveitchik on Tefillah B'tzibur. What he tells me is that there's this book, I have it over there, about Rav Meir Soloveitchik, 2 volumes, Rav Meir Soloveitchik, that's the Brisker Rav's son. It's basically discussions he had, all sorts of interesting stuff, including in there, Meir Soloveitchik says that we all know that the Rav, J.B. Soloveitchik, is greater than all of us. Just too bad he had the wrong hashkafas. But they acknowledge that in terms of learning that the Rav was greater than all of them. But in this book, he writes that someone said this actually to the Brisker Rav, that Reb Chaim was not makpid on Tefillah but Tzibur. When I say not makpid, that means he didn't feel he needed to go daven with a minyan if he's somewhere. Kriyas Torah, yes. And in the book, Reb Meir replies that this is the wrong way to put it. Reb Chaim was makpid on everything. If he didn't daven but Tzibur, it's because he's makpid on something else. So you need to stress that it's not, and I didn't mean that in the sense that, in any event, I didn't mean that he just didn't think, wasn't serious about it. Maybe he thought that at that time he's in a sugya, it's not as important, or he could have more kavanah. I already quoted a couple weeks ago that the Chazon Ish tells someone, Erev Shabbos, he recommends to him not to daven mincha with the minyan. He's talking about a situation where they would daven, let's say, earlier in the day, because he says for his kavanah, so it's not that there, you could say it's not that he's not makpid on the minyan, it's that he's makpid on kavanah. It's like the old thing, Reb Chaim, the famous story, it's that we've told so many times, it's not when he told people to eat on Yom Kippur, it's not that he's not makpid on Yom Kippur, it's that he's more makpid on pikuach nefesh. Okay, we got a couple more seconds here. Couple more minutes, I'll get to maybe only one of these, but if I get to 2, we're lucky. I still told you about Amore. But I need to reply again, because sometimes you ask the questions, and I'm a rego achas. So Baruch asked the question last week about Vayehi. And you all listened, if you listened to Kriyas Torah this morning also. But if you listen to Kriyas Torah over Yontif, yesterday, you would have heard it. You'll hear it next Shabbos. Baruch asked me, how is it pronounced? So I want to, I gave you an explanation, but just let me say 2 more minutes about this. And that way you can, in shul, you can have something to tell your neighbor if you go to shul outdoors. I want to show. First, I want to pull up so you can see now here, let me pull up here. Here is the laning. Well, first of all, we know Kiddush. Some people start Kiddush Vayer Vayivoker. So that's also something to pay attention to. Here's a mistake a lot of people make in Kiddush. First of all, it begins, it's not Vayichulu, it's Vayichulu. But in this word, some people say Vayivarech Elohim es Yom HaShavi'i. It's not Vayivarech, it's Vayivarech. And it's not Vayivarech, it's Vayivarech. Okay, but that's not what I'm concerned with. I'm interested in this word. You could see, a second, you could, I just want to see if you see my cursor here. Ah, yes, okay. So you see my cursor on the words Vayer Vayivoker. The word Vayi is written 2 different ways in the Torah, in Tanakh. Sometimes it's written just by itself without that line, that hyphen, the makef, in which case it doesn't have that little line next to the vav. So everyone pronounces it Vayi. That there's no question. What do you do in a case like this? When you have that little line there, how do you pronounce it? Is it Vayi Erev, Vayi Voker? Or is it, like some of you might say, each one of you yourself, if you say it's a Kiddush, you have to think about what you say. Do you say Vayihi Erev, Vayihi Erev, Vayihi Voker? Or is it Vayi Erev, Vayi Voker? So here is, I want you to pay attention to Rabbi Weeder.
Es kol yerek esev lochla vayihi chayin vayar Elohim es kol asher asa v'hinei tov me'od vayihi erev vayihi voker yom hashishi.
So he clearly says vayihi erev vayihi voker. He makes it a shva na. He doesn't read it vayihi erev vayihi voker. Okay, now you know from last week that my admiration for Rabbi Weeder's ability is bar none. I think he's the best, but I have to say that I disagree with him here. And let me explain to you why I disagree with him. If you open up, for instance, first that line there, what is that line? That line is what we call the meta or a Gaia. That is supposed to tell you, for example, either secondary stress on a word, or sometimes it's used for vowel length. If you open up my favorite book I used to teach my biblical Hebrew, you can see it here. You can see here, Practical Grammar for Classical Hebrew by Weingreen. If you look in this book, if you want to learn biblical Hebrew, this is the best. If you look on page 9, and if you look again on page 18, he tells you that you pronounce this Vayehi. And that's the whole point of the Gaia there, the metric. And as far as I know, this is also what is found in the academic literature. But I have to say that we don't follow the academic literature. And maybe this is how it's supposed to be years ago, but we follow a tradition, a Masorah. And if you look at all the tikkunim that distinguish us, you look at Ish Matzliach, you look at Simanim, you look at the art scroll, Siddur, they all leave this as Shvanach. Secondly, if you look in the Mincha Shai, I'm holding it right here, he says explicitly that although this is if you look in the Nosafas of Mincha Shai, it's a nice new edition, page 102 to 103, he says that although the Gaia often does lead to a Shvana afterwards, like we saw Ritzafat, he specifically says that in the case, and he gives this example even of Vayhi, it does not. I'll read you the exact language here. Find it here. He deals with all sorts of other interesting things, unusual things like Halviim. But yes, if it has patach kamo vayihi, he says that in such a case it's a shvanach, and so therefore I believe. But if anyone knows Rabbi Weider, or if I'm missing something, if there's another Masorite that who thinks differently, but I looked and I couldn't find everyone. As far as I can tell, all the traditional sources say that this word should be vahi erev, vahi voker, not even though there is a Gaia there, it's an exception, and it's not vahi erev, vahi voker. It's not the biggest deal. It's not like ritzafat, which changes the meaning. It's not like another word that has the Gaia there. We say it in davening, but it's in Kriyas Torah. Vayirahu am es Adonai vayiminu b'Adonai of Moshe Avdo. If you pronounce that vayiru, where it's a shanach, you need to correct the Baal Koreh there, because that means they saw, not that they feared. And you'll notice there's 2 yuds, and there's also the Gaia there. So there it makes a difference. Here it doesn't. Okay, we're going to have to, we're going to hold off. Next week, we'll be back to Amore. I want to show you something interesting. Remind you of the Dean Martin song, too. But Shimon Steinmetz, who called my attention to this, I'll get to who I saw something he wrote about this. We'll get to this next week, as well as what the Zohar says about it. But I want to pick up now in the book. We are up to let's see, Simon. We're starting a new section here. It's called Darchei Psikat Halacha, not Darkei. That's since we're talking grammar. I think the very first class we had 20 weeks ago, I pointed that out. It's not Darkei. It's not Darkei Shalom. It's Darchei. Darchei, ways of deciding halacha, and we're on page 189, Simon Peibe's 82. And the first couple ones here connect to something we had before. The first person who's answering question here, everyone should know who he is today because he's very important. That's Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef, the Rishon LeZion, succeeded. Well, I shouldn't say succeeded his father. His father was Rishon LeZion Rabbi Yosef, and he is now the Rishon LeZion. And for those who are interested and find important the whole issue of Corona, he's been very strong on this. In general, the Sephardic rabbis have all been strong on this. It's saying not to go into synagogues, to only daven outside, and that's Rav Yitzchak Yosef. But Rav Yitzchak Yosef is obviously the follower of his father, the Rav Yosef, the whole idea that all Sephardim in Eretz Yisrael, at least Sephardim, we'll see how Ashkenazim perhaps, have to follow the rulings of the Shulhan Arukh. Get to the questions, Susanna and the rest. I'll get to you at the end. I asked him a question, a simple question. because the Ravad Yosef insists that the Yemenites need to follow the Shulchan Arukh. That is, they have a tradition in areas where they don't follow the Shulchan Arukh. They have their own approach. They follow the Rambam. The Moroccans have many examples where they don't follow the Shulchan Arukh. Why do the Yemenites need to follow the Shulchan Arukh? The Yemenites are not Sephardim. The Yemenites are as Sephardic as the Italians are, or as the Germans are. I mean, what do they have to do with Sephardic Jews? And the Moroccans, for that matter, the Moroccans are Sephardic. In fact, the Moroccans are more Sephardic than the Iraqis, the ones from Bavel, because you actually have Spanish Jews in Morocco. That's what Sfarad means. But why do they need to follow the Shulchan Aruch? Just because they come to the land of Israel. If they came as individuals, first of all, let's start with this assumption that Chacham Avad Yosef has, which no one before him has ever said. That's what makes it so radical, that every single person living in the land of Israel has to follow the Shulchan Aruch. No one has ever said that. Even the Shulchan Aruch didn't say that, because it said if you had other minhagim that it predated what he wrote, you can keep them. But then you did have many people, though, who said that they had to adopt the minhag of Eretz Yisrael, which was basically Shulchan Aruch, but not entirely. Rabbi Shlush, the late Rabbi Shlush from Netanya, has a whole kuntras against Rav Ovadia on this. But let's go with what Rav Ovadia says. If you come as an entire community, if you come together as a group, if you come as an individual, then you have to follow the practices of the local customs and practices of the community. But we know the Moroccans came as a group. They came from around 54 and for the next 10 years. So they didn't come individually. The Yemenites also came with significant numbers. They had their own Beit Din already in the 1920s. So why should they have to follow that? That's my question. And he says as follows. This is the Rishon LeZion Yitzchak Yosef. He says that there's a responsum of the Shulchan Aruch who says that when you come into a community, even if you have different practices, you have to accept the practices of that community. However, the Pani Meiros, whose kever we saw, he was the Rav of Meir of Eisenstadt, he didn't hold that. He held that you could still keep your practices as an Ashkenazi. He says if you're an Ashkenazi, you go with the Sephardim, or you don't have to accept it. And Chacham Avadia says the Sephardim accepted this tshuva. In other words, the Sephardim accepted what Yosef Karo said, that if you come as individuals, therefore you need to accept the Shulchan Aruch. The Ashkenazim did it. But that doesn't change my question. He doesn't answer my question. That the Moroccans came as an entire group, and the Yemenites came, and that's why the Moroccans don't accept Chacham Avad Yosef in this. The Syrians did, and others did, but the Moroccans refused to, and the Yemenites refused to. And he doesn't really, we'll see his brother tries to answer it better, but he doesn't really answer the question. He simply says that Sephardim, since the Sephardim all accepted the Shulchan Aruch's ruling, but the Shulchan Aruch's ruling is dealing with individuals who come, not with, and he ends it, he says, if anyone who does like Shulchan Aruch, you're doing like, he says, Osek 200 Rabbanim. What does that mean, Osek 200 Rabbanim? What it means is there's this tradition that 200 rabbis gave their approval to the Shulchan Aruch, that this should be what binds us. But it's a difficult, he hasn't really answered the question, why an entire community? He has answered why Ashkenazi wouldn't have to. Everyone wonders, why do Ashkenazim go to Israel? He and his father have never insisted that they become Sephardim. But he hasn't really, so that we understand. But as far as I can see, in this response, in number 82, he only answers why individuals. And that was the practice. Generally, that if you came from Morocco, if you came from Yemen, let's say you came in the 18th century, the 19th century, you would be absorbed in the local community. And you wouldn't keep a private practice that you had. Now, the same question I asked, and that's Simon Pei Gimel, to his brother, Rav Avraham Yosef. Here he is, who was chief rabbi of Cholon. We dealt with him as well. And he goes into a little more detail. But I don't think he's right historically. I said, what's the difference? Why do the Sephardim, you say the Sephardim have to accept it and the Ashkenazim don't? He says the Ashkenazim, when they first came to the land of Israel, they did everything like the Sephardim. He says the Ashkenazim who first came to Israel, they did everything like the Sephardim. until there was a mass immigration of Ashkenazim when they created a Beit Din for Ashkenazi. But this is not true historically. This is not true at all. The Ashkenazim have been coming to the land of Israel really since medieval times. So if you deal with one person, it's one thing. But when they came as families, as small groups, they did not follow the Sephardic approach. And he says, when they came with a mass immigration, they set up a Beit Din Shel Kol Mikot Ashkenazim, which he calls the Beit Din of the Eidah Haredi. Now that is the Beit Din in the 19th century. It's true that in the 19th century, the Ashkenazim set up a Beit Din for Ashkenazim. However, they were not following Sephardic practices before. The followers of the Vilna Gaon, the followers of the early Hasidim, they weren't following Sephardic practices. They had Ashkenazic practices. Furthermore, he's incorrect to say that this Beit Din, this 19th century Beit Din, which, for instance, Shmuel Salant was the head of it for many years, he says that this is the Eidah Haredi. This isn't the Eidah Haredi. Or I should say, the Eidah Haredi says it's their Beit Din, but who says they're right? The question is, what's the continuation? Ratzi Pesach Frank, who was on this Beit Din, he claims that it's not the Eidah Haredi, that the continuation of Shmuel Salant's Beit Din is what became the Rabbanut's Beit Din, because Ratzi Pesach Frank, who was on the Beit Din, he continued to be on the Beit Din. This Beit Din was absorbed into the state of Israel. So this and the Eidah Haredi is a separatist organization that was created separate. So I mean, look, they will say that we're the real continuation, but I don't think historically that's correct either, because none of the people who were on the Beit Din from Rav Shmuel Salant were in the Eidah Haredi. They all remained in the regular Beit Din. It raises the interesting question, though, who's the true historic community? Shimshon Raphael Hirsch always claimed that even though he's a separatist community, that we are the continuation of old Frankfurt. So, for example, you look at the great Rabbanim of Frankfurt, you have, let's say, the Rav Pinchas Horowitz and all the Gedolim. If you go to the cemetery, you see the great rabbis who were in Frankfurt. We are the continuation. Why? Because we're continuing traditional Judaism. The fact that the reformers took over and now there's an Orthodox segment to the larger community, they're not the continuation. So that was Hirsch's perspective, but it doesn't really apply here. Okay, so that answers the first thing. Then he says, and he says that the Ashkenazim always regarded themselves as a separate kehillah. And he says there were two separate Batei Din. There was Ashkenazi and the Sephardic, so there's no prohibition of what we call losis skodager, don't separate. And also he says that these Ashkenazim, they never accepted the Shulhan Arukh to begin with, because in Chutz La'aretz they followed Rav Moshe Isserles. So you're going to say when they come to Israel, they have to all of a sudden follow the Shulhan Arukh? No, they continue following Rav Moshe Isserles. But what about my question about the Yemenites and others? He says as follows. Le'umatam baruch rov hateimanim. So it's a malitza here from Kedusha. In Dalit, you say, Umasam baruch yomeru. So he says, opposite them, Lumasam, Rov HaTeimanim, he says, and all the Moroccans and those from Iraq, they accepted the rulings of the Shulhan Arukh in their lands. Okay, that is basically correct. It's true that most of the Yemenites, not just the Shami, which he says, even the Baladi, they accepted to a certain extent. And I don't know why he says that most of the Yemenites are Shami. I think it's probably 50-50. And it's true, the Moroccans and the Iraqis did accept the Shulhan Arukh, except for when they didn't accept it. So, for instance, in Morocco, we just finished Sukkot. Did your wives, if you have any Sephardim here, this is one area where Chacham Avad Yosef was very influential. For instance, in the Syrian community, women always made a bracha on the lulav. Chacham Avad Yosef was able to change that. I heard this from Rabbi Shammah. However, in Morocco, they also made a bracha on the lulav. And in Bavel, they also made a bracha on lulav. And in at least the Moroccans still continue to make the blessing on the lulav, as far as I know. And I know for a fact that I know it because you have the people of Mordechai Eliyahu's followers and others, or I should say Rav Yaakov, the people from the Kaf HaChaim's family, they write about how they do not accept Chacham Avad Yosef. They make the bracha, their women make the bracha on the lulav. So though it's true that in general, the people in Iraq and Morocco accepted the Shulchan Arukh, but in many areas, they didn't accept the Shulchan Arukh. In Bavel, for instance, women would make, they do like the Ashkenazim, they'd light the Shabbos candles and then make the bracha. So why should they, when they come to Israel, the Moroccans come as a whole community, hundreds of thousands. Why should they give up their practices? He says that when they first started coming to Eretz Yisrael, they came as individuals, and therefore they were bottled to the larger group. Okay, and he said they didn't establish a Beit Din immediately on their own. I would agree then. And I think they would agree that those Moroccans who came, and they're always Moroccans always loved Eretz Yisrael. They were coming in the 19th century, even before that, they were coming to Eretz Yisrael. So they come to Eretz Yisrael, they join a Sephardic community, they adopt the Shulchan Aruch's rules. But when they started coming in the 50s, they were coming as huge communities. So Rav Shalom Messas, who we've mentioned, and I think we'll come back to him with one more time, his attitude always was, we came here as a group. When Morocco basically it became too difficult to live in Morocco when it became independent. We came as a group, and therefore we continue with our practices. Just like we did it in Casablanca, we continue here. So the fact that, which is true, that they didn't set up their own Batei Din, they don't set up their own Shechita, he says, I don't see why that's relevant. It's not a question, I don't see why. Rav Shalom Messas, and all these other great rabbis say it's not relevant. The fact that we didn't set up our own Beit Din for Shechita, we come with a group, we have our own shuls. Tunisia, they have their own shuls, and therefore we continue doing the same practices we did in where we were. In many places, the practices changed, but not because the Moroccans and the Tunisians gave in. It's because the kids started being educated in the Shas school system. So the young people came home and they started pressuring the older people, and the older people either gave up, changed them in hugging. So for instance, I'll give you another example. And this one has nothing to do with the Shulchan Aruch. It's not in the Shulchan Aruch. Chacham Avad Yosef was very stringent on this, based on the response of the Rambam that only became known, it was only published early in 1934, although it's mentioned in Maram al-Ashkar's Shuvot, that you can't stand for the Aseret Dibros. Everyone in Morocco stood for the Aseret Dibros. Everyone in Iraq stood for the Aseret Dibros when you read it, and also on Shavuos. But if you're teaching, and they were teaching all the kids in the Shas school system not to do this, they're going to come home and they're going to say, it's not right. Chacham Avad says not to. So now you go to these shuls, people won't stand, or they'll stand from the beginning of the Aliyah. That's how these things change, because you get the young generation, and then as Chaim Soloveitchik, he introduced us to this word that people like to use, this fancy word to show they're educated without even realizing perhaps where it comes from, mimetic, from the word mimesis, that the mimetic tradition of Morocco is being pushed out, and of Yemen and all these places, because you have the Yalkut Yosef. The Yalkut Yosef is the new Shulchan Aruch that all the Sephardim use. It's a great work. From Yitzhak Yosef, 20-some volumes, but that's become the standard work now, and that's just like the Mishnah Berurah. We're going to see today maybe about how the Mishnah Berurah was so influential, and the Sephardic word, the Yalkut Yosef, was so influential, and it's basically been normalizing the practices of Avad Yosef, making them normative, I should say. So that's, and he acknowledges in the last paragraph, if a Kehila Shlema of Rabbanev and Dayanev, if a whole community of rabbis and Dayanim came to Eretz Yisrael and immediately set up for themselves a format which kept their practices in Chutz La'aretz, then they can continue doing what they're doing. But that's exactly what they did. That's exactly what they did from Morocco and Tunisia and other places. So the very next tshuva, just a tiny one, number 84, this really relates to something we had earlier, but we separated it because it really flows from here. But we spoke about it already. I asked for Yitzhak Yosef, why can't an Ashkenazi then eat kitnios? And he explains that the Ashkenazim never accepted this idea that they are absorbed into the Sephardim. And therefore, they're not, even though Rav Avram Yosef disagrees. We saw this already. So that's just, we have here in the three tshuvot we saw. If you don't find it convincing, you're not alone, because the leading Sephardic rabbis are Mordechai Eliyahu and Rav Shalom Messas and many other leading Sephardic rabbis never got behind Rav Avad Yosef's attempt to make normative his understanding. And it led to a lot of disputes. It led to, in the early years, Chacham Avad Yosef dealt with a lot of tsaras. in fact, his earliest work was burnt by the Iraqi sages. I shouldn't say sages. It was burnt by Iraqi scholars of sorts. Because they thought he was being disrespectful to the Ben Ish Chai, because here he comes, he's a young person, like 20 years old, saying that now that we're in Eretz Yisrael, we don't need to follow the Ben Ish Chai. For the Iraqi Jews, the Ben Ish Chai was absolute. You don't not follow the Ben Ish Chai just because you're in Israel. So these, I think these letters are of interest. I asked them because I don't know really where they ever explained this issue, and I'm not really convinced. And Rabbi Zinni, who I mentioned from the Technion 2 classes ago, he has a long piece about saying, do you make a bracha on Rosh Chodesh, halal for Rosh Chodesh, because Chacham Avad Yosef says no. And he has about 80 pages there, which he really takes apart Avad Yosef's whole approach that the North Africans need to immediately reject their traditions. If it happens over time, it happens over time. But the idea that there's something wrong with it. So this is an important issue. Especially if you live in Israel, you might be aware of this. The idea of the Sephardic normativity, which is what Chacham Avad Yosef was battling for 40 years. And his sons still believe it, but they don't really push it the same way he did. Now we move on to number 85. Getting back to this great rabbi who I believe is, as I said, the leading scholar of the Yemenites, Rav Ratzabi, Yitzhak Ratzabi. Here's what I think is a very interesting tshuva, which I never saw explained in any sefer, and he helps explain it, but it's like we used to say in yeshiva that about Tosfos sometimes, the questions are better than the answers. And I still think the question is better than the answer, because the answer still leaves, but you all have something to contribute, I think, to this. Well, here's my question. Well, first let me tell you why I had this question. It had an actual experience I had, that I was at a shiur. I don't even remember, I guess maybe it was in Boston. This responsum, it goes back to the 1990. It doesn't have a date on it. It was like 1990. And we were learning, I don't remember what he was giving between Mincha and Ma'ariv. He could have been doing for Chai Adam or Mishnah Berurah, whatever the sefer was, it's not important. But after quoting what the sefer said, the rabbi said, but we don't hold like that. The rabbi told us, despite the fact that we're reading the sefer, we don't hold like that. In other words, I don't even remember whether we're more machmir or more meiko, whatever he said, we don't hold like it. So I asked the rabbi later, I said to him, here we're learning the sefer. Let's say it's Chai Adam, for sake of argument, it's Shulhan Arukh. And we read it, and he told us we could do this on Shabbos. And you said, but we don't hold of it. So I asked, well, how is the person who's learning the sefer supposed to know that we, in quotation marks, don't hold of it? He's sitting home every Shabbos, he's learning the Chai Adam. How is he supposed to know we don't hold of it? So the rabbi said to me, he replied, that's why you need to have a rov. That's what he said. So the point being, so you can ask. But the whole thing made no sense to me at the time. It doesn't make sense. What does that mean? Every single thing I read in the Chai Adam, I'm supposed to ask my local rabbi, do we hold of this? And what does that mean, do we hold of it? Basically, I'm asking, does he hold of it? And why should I listen to him over the Chai Adam? And he's going to say, well, because his rabbi told him. But why isn't the Chai Adam good enough? And quite apart from that, you can't do it in practice. Well, every single halacha you learn, you have to call up the rabbi on the phone and say, well, I just learned this simon. Do we hold of this? I mean, it's undoable. And no one in history ever said that there's such a concept that you got to ask about every single thing. So I started wondering, though, does this mean no? So fine, what this rabbi told me made no sense. But does this mean that you can take any sefer? I could take, when I was in high school, we all learned the Kitzur Shulchan Arukh. We divided it and we went through it and had a few different grades. So other grades, at least one grade we did. Another grade we did the Chai Adam. Later, I guess you do the Mishnah Berurah. So can I take the Kitzur? Can I take the Mishnah Berurah? Can I take the Aruch HaShulchan? Can I take the Chai Adam? And I learned that. I make a Seder, and what it says I do. Or do I have to always be worrying about that I'm doing something wrong because whoever we is, don't hold to that? So that's the question I asked him. If you have a dispute between the Achronim, like you see, there's a dispute between the Mishnah Berurah and the Aruch HaShulchan. Do I need to ask a posek what to do, or can I say, well, Avid Kamar, that either whatever you do, you're right. whatever you do, you're wrong. It doesn't really matter. You can take whatever way you want because they're both great rabbis. Or do I have to ask? Who would you ask? Then you have to find a big posek to ask to decide it. And I wasn't asking about like a big thing, like one of these major issues we're speaking about, just any issue, how to make tea on Shabbos or something. And then I said this is an important question because there's many people who learn Mishnah Berurah, Chayadim, etc., and they don't know if they can rely on what they're learning because maybe we don't paskin like this. That's what the rabbi told me. He said you can't just learn the Chayadim and the Mishnah Berurah because you don't know. Maybe we don't hold like him. I'll tell you something else. That you can't even rely on the Mishnah Berurah because maybe the Mishnah Berurah didn't hold like that. What do I mean by that? Well, I just was learning over Shabbos. The Sefer points out from Rav Ruderman that he was with the Chafetz Chaim when he was young, and the Chafetz Chaim was eating dessert, and he didn't make a bracha on the dessert. And Rav Ruderman asked the Chafetz Chaim, "I don't understand. In the Mishnah Berurah, you say that you're supposed to make a bracha on dessert," and he quotes the Chafetz Chaim as saying, "Yes, that's what I wrote that's what I thought when I wrote it. But now that I see that people eat dessert, it's part of the meal, not extra. And therefore, I no longer hold that way. When I was in yeshiva, they told us that for fruit. And to this day, I make ha'etz on fruit because it's not really part of the meal. But here I just saw over Yontif that the Chafetz Chaim retracted this and said that, no, now that you eat it as part of the meal, it's not like something separate. The one bracha includes it all. So that raises the question, do we rely on Rav Ruderman? Do we have to, what do we do in a case like that? But, here you have the Ein Davar Sof, and I think most people would say you can rely on the Chafetz Chaim because even if he changed his mind, the Shita still has value. Even if he nevertheless didn't hold it in the end, the fact is that it has a good basis. So I asked him, in short, can I take a single book like the Mishnah Berurah Chayadim and follow everything he says? And if not, well, what's the proper way to learn halakha? How am I supposed to learn halakha if you tell me that I can't rely on it? And so let's see how he answers this. Then wait till you see what he says about the Aruch HaShulchan. It's going to get some of you very upset. The mimetic people are going to be very upset when he says about Shulhan Arukh. He says as follows, and I don't know if everyone would agree with what he says, even though he doesn't really answer the question as much as I wanted, because he sort of is speaking about the rabbis, the posek, but not so much about individuals later on, but I think it applies. So he says as follows. He begins, in the case you're describing, when there's machlokas among the achronim, ein halacha muchrat muchrat. He says there's no absolute decision. We don't have a Shulchan Arukh, we don't have a Gemara. You can't tell me that if the Aruch HaShulchan, or say Mishnah Berurah disagrees with the Chayadim or the Kitzur Shulchan Arukh, that one position is out of the fold now. We can't. It's like no one would say today that you can pick up just some medieval. We have a lot of these medieval codes. Pick up, for example, the Itter or something, or the Mordechai, and just read that and say, well, I'm going to follow. No, because we have the Shulchan Arukh, we have a whole tradition. But what he explains is that we don't have anything after the Shulchan Arukh. Although he's going to he might backtrack a little later. He's going to try to say that the Mishnah Berurah, at least for Ashkenazi, might be that new era, I guess you could say. But in general, no one's going to say you can pick up just a medieval code and just read it. You can't even pick up the Rambam and learn like that. But he's saying for Achronim, recent poskim, he says that's absolutely permissible because we don't have and he quotes the Gemara I said, Ovid Kamar, there's no, we don't have an absolute decision. And then he says, and this applies to lay people as well, so you don't need to ask a rabbi. You see the Chafetz, you see the Chayadim, it says that you can rely on it. What he says, and which is true, is, if you live in the Orthodox community, over time you learn that certain leniencies are not generally accepted or certain stringencies are not accepted, and you'll learn, what is basically done. But the idea that you can rely on what you read in a standard text, he says it's absolutely permissible, and there's no obligation to, because you're reading the Sefer. And he says, oh, well, you don't even need a Pesach Yom B'Sharas Farm. You don't need to look at any other books. You see something that's a little strange in the Chayyada, maybe to a little leniency. You don't need to look in other books to see. You can rely on it 100%. Then he says, of course, it's best that you pick the sefer you learn from that are the most accepted and for samim that and famous that have spread in Israel. So he says that any sefer like that's halacha sefer, which is an reliable sefer you can use, but it's better to take the accepted ones. There's a lot of books, halacha books that were published. There's a lot of books, for instance, on Hilchos Shabbos. People don't know about them anymore because Shmir Shabbos Kol Chasa pushed them out. There's the Kitzur Shulhan Arukh. There's updated versions of the Kitzur Shulhan Arukh. There was Rabbi Feldman who did one. There's others. There's all sorts of halacha works, and you could take any of those are fine. He says. For the religious Zionists now, well, just like Yalkut Yosef for the Sfardim is the new Shulchan Aruch, this work by Rabbi Eliezer Malamed, Penine Halacha, is becoming the standard work. They've printed like 1 million of them. They're studied in all the schools. The Kitzur Shulchan Aruch used to be the most popular book, but who reads the Kitzur anymore? We have the updated ones. So he said, and by the way, we have this for all areas. You want to know Avelos, so they have the books on Avelos there. Muktzah, you have books on Muktzah. So, but there's probably 15 books on Muktzah you could learn. And he says you can rely on all of them, assuming they're acceptable story. But it's better not to take some book that no one knows about, even if the rabbi was a big scholar. He says, use the works that are accepted. And what are the ones? Aruch HaShulchan, which I mentioned, he says. Oh, then he says, but he says, Aruch HaShulchan, which I mentioned, he says, I heard from some Gedolim, you don't rely on the Aruch HaShulchan. You'll see my response to this. So when he says, it's incredible, though, he's Yemenite, okay, but still he studied in Kol Torah. He says, pick the Sfarim that are the most accepted and famous. And as for the Aruch HaShulchan, because I said in my letter, can you take any book you want? Like, let's say there's a dispute to Mishnah Aruch HaShulchan, he says, don't take the Aruch HaShulchan, because I've heard from Gedolim not to rely on the Aruch HaShulchan. I was shocked when I heard that because, as we mentioned before, Rabbi Henkin, and I mentioned this in my classes, Rav Henkin says that if it's a dispute between the Aruch HaShulchan and the Mishnah Berurah, you go like the Aruch HaShulchan for a variety of reasons. First of all, he's later. He quotes the Mishnah Berurah, but the second of all, he's a community rabbi. Mishnah Berurah is not a community rabbi, so it's a Maisa. And they gave all sorts of reasons why. And I made this public that I in my classes, a big student, and I wrote about it. And then a grandson of Moshe Feinstein wrote to me that he heard personally from Moshe Feinstein the exact same thing, that in a dispute between the Mishnah Berurah and the Aruch HaShulchan, we go like the Aruch HaShulchan. And it's known that Rav Soloveitchik also held the same thing, that the Aruch HaShulchan, they held in Lita, they held very much of the Aruch HaShulchan. Not over the Mishnah Berurah. We're going to see what he says when I say that in a minute. But he says, no, it's true. The Aruch HaShulchan is a Sefer Nifla. It's a wondrous book, and the author is a Gavra Rabbah. He's a great man. He says, but there's Dvarim Mechudashim. There's all sorts of new ideas in the Aruch HaShulchan, and his proofs are not always sufficient. One of the things about the Aruch HaShulchan that it's mentioned in the classic Soloveitchik article on Mimetic Society, Rupture and Reconstruction, is that the Aruch HaShulchan in many ways sees himself as justifying the oral, the community tradition in the face of the written tradition. So you find a lot of limud schus there. But he says and he says to look the Chazon Ish and Shar Mitzuyan B'Halacha. That was an old, very nice work on from like the 50s and the 60s, I should say, on the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch by Rabbi Brown, that they point out a difficulty in the Aruch HaShulchan, but I don't see why that's a big deal. You could point out a difficulty in every source. But you see Rabbi Ratzabi downgrading the Aruch HaShulchan. Among the books, he doesn't want you going by the Aruch HaShulchan, even though technically you can. It's a reliable work, but he says you shouldn't. So what does he say? Mishnah Berurah, Chai Adam, Shtilei Zaytim, that's a Yemenite work of halacha. Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, Ben Ishchai, Kaf HaChaim, the standard ones. He says you can do like them. Kozman, as long as you don't know that the Olam doesn't, the general practice is not like them, you can follow them. So you can make a seder to study these works, and then later, 5 years from now, you'll learn that really, despite what the Ben Ishchai says, we don't hold like him. The minhag is not like then. that's okay. I reply, that was his tshuva. Originally, although this was published in his volume Olat Yitzchak, it originally was two separate letters. So I wrote back to him with a different question as well as adding on. I said, well, are you then allowed to take, because he said that all these books are reliable. Can I take heterim from all, can I look, I go to the Mishnah Berurah, he has a heter here, and then the Chayyim, he has a leniency there. Can I take all these leniencies and say, well, since they're said by reliable great rabbis, I can follow them, because as long as they don't contradict. We'll see the Gemara says that you're a Russia if you take leniencies from this and from that, but it's clear in the Gemara it means if they contradict each other. So can I look in all the different Sfarim, and in many cases you can always find a leniency. Is that okay, first of all? And I say, for example, can I take a heter, and Hilchos Shabbos from the Mishnah Berurah, and another heter on Hilchos Sukkah from the Chayyim, when they have nothing to do with one another? And also about Chumros. Some people like to do Chumros. Later on, Ratzabi says, people, if they have problems of nerves, they like to take all the different Chumros. Can I take Chumros from different Sfarim? Or must you take one Sefer? Take a Sefer, Chayyim, Mishnah Berurah, and follow it consistently. And if not, well, then what's the proper path? That's my first question. You hear a lot about I have to follow all the Sefer consistently, but none of us do. Even the people, people who ask, certain posting, they ask for Shechter and everything, but I haven't met any individual who doesn't not drink milk or something, and Rav Shechter are certain chumras that people don't follow. And what does that mean? We all eat from the OU, and we're relying on Rav Shechter. Does that mean we're bound by everything he says? And Rabbi Belsky, and you have plenty. Moshe Feinstein's own family. I know this for a fact because I spoke to one of his descendants. They themselves used liquid soap on Shabbos. Maybe they use time clocks also. When Ramosha says you can't. So I don't. Where do you draw the line on this? That's my first question. And then I get to the Aruch HaShulchan because this bothered me a lot. And I said that I find it quite strange that you wrote that you heard from Gedolim not to rely on the Aruch HaShulchan. Who's greater than the Aruch HaShulchan? Even when I was in yeshiva in the 80s. I know Rav Lichtenstein at BMT told the guys from Grus to use the Aruch HaShulchan. I said, and I was wrong, but I said, it's almost certain to me that this shmua, that what you heard, he said he didn't hear him personally, he heard in the opinion of certain Gedolim not to rely on the Aruch HaShulchan, you must have heard from the Hungarian poskim. Because the Hungarians never accepted the Aruch HaShulchan, they never accepted Shalom Shvadron, the Marsham. The Hungarians didn't accept him. I said because the Hungarians never accepted the Aruch HaShulchan because he was lenient in many areas. And many of the Hungarian poskim were stringent. And I said, and many reasons, the reason they were stringent is they're fighting against the reformers, which you didn't have in Lithuania. And I say to him, you cannot say this about I said it as respectfully as I could, that you can't say this about the Aruch HaShulchan, that the Aruch HaShulchan, you shouldn't use the Aruch HaShulchan as your go-to work. Subsequent to writing this in around 2010, you have a new edition that came out of the Aruch HaShulchan, published in Israel, and it's the Aruch HaShulchan, but in the bottom you have the notes there, so it's the Aruch HaShulchan on top, and the bottom it says Piskei Mishnah Berurah. So every time the Aruch HaShulchan says something, the Mishnah Berurah disagrees, you have the correction, as it were, of the Mishnah Berurah. What this is saying is to people that, yes, you can all buy the Aruch HaShulchan as a work of Torah to learn, but in terms of practical halacha, what it means is that the Aruch HaShulchan is not to be relied on, because we're telling you every time that the Mishnah Berurah disagrees. Rav Dov Lior, who we saw him earlier, he has a response in Tshuva in the Sefer. He wrote a blistering attack about how this is an unbelievable chutzpah, that the Aruch HaShulchan is no longer able to exist as an independent Sefer without pointing out that you can't rely on it. And here the Mishnah Berurah says this, and it is a really degrading of the Aruch HaShulchan to say that he only now can stand if you point out where you shouldn't follow him. So you can. If anyone's interested, you can see Dov Lior, his attack on that edition. But it is true. And then I say that it's known that all the Gedolim of Lita relied very much on the Aruch HaShulchan, and there are many Gedolim who thought that the koach, the power of the Aruch HaShulchan, Gadol Yoser Mishnah Berurah, that is greater, that we rely on him. Oh, if there's a machlokas between the Aruch HaShulchan and the Mishnah Berurah, we go like the Aruch HaShulchan. Now, then I go on, I say, I don't think you can say that one is greater than another. Who are we to say, who's even a posek today to say that one is greater? But it's not about greater. It's just, but they're saying, I mean, they said, it's not for us to say it, that if there's a machlokas, you rely on the Aruch HaShulchan. It doesn't even mean he's greater. It just means for whatever reason that his psukim are to be accepted. The Aruch HaShulchan, the Rogatchover was definitely greater in learning than the Mishnah Berurah. There's no question about it. But we don't rely on the Rogatchover's halachot. Greatness is, that's not the only thing. There have been great rabbis who just, but they're not accepted in terms of the final halachic ruling. It's never been just because you have the greatest mind. Rav Chaim Ozer was never, no one thought Rav Chaim Ozer was greater in learning than the Rogatchover, but everyone accepted Rav Chaim Ozer over the Rogatchover. That's halacha is not only about who's the greatest genius. There's all sorts of, and as Rav Moshe Feinstein once said, that we have a lot of tsaros from Iluyim. The Iluyim, geniuses, often cause a lot of troubles because they're so great that they come up with all sorts of unusual things. And so you gotta, Rav Moshe says that we have tsaros sometimes from Iluyim. But I said to him, it's not for us to judge who's greater. I just want to say that, the words of the Aruch HaShulchan are Divrei Elohim Chayim. That they're Torah, and they were accepted among all Gedol Yisrael, and Chas v'Shalom to lessen his kavod. And I said that you mentioned the Chazon Ish rejected in Aruch HaShulchan. But I say that the truth is, as I heard from Talmidei Chachamim who are learned in this, that on almost every page of the Chazon Ish's works, he rejects the Mishnah Berurah too. So the fact that the Aruch HaShulchan is rejected by the Chazon Ish in one place, so what? He rejects doesn't say that you can't rely on the Aruch HaShulchan. He rejects the Mishnah Berurah also. So let us begin with his answer, and then we won't be able to finish it, but we'll at least start on the answer, and then we'll pick up the first paragraph. He answers, Vaya'an Yitzchak. Isaac, his name is Yitzchak, answers. Okay, the first question: can you take a heter from this posek and from that posek? I mean, the whole issue is so interesting because what's the role of the community rabbi here? If let's say I go on, there's people have spoken about this. I go to Rabbi Google. What's the issue here? So I go to Rabbi Google and I see there's an article by Big Talmid Chacham, and he presents the different shitot. And then he presents what he thinks is the proper approach. I have no connection to this rabbi. There's plenty of big Talmidei Chachamim writing online. What, do I need to then go ask the local rabbi? Can I open a can on Shabbos to drink the soda? What do I need to ask the rabbi for? I already know the different shitas. So okay, so then maybe it's machlokas or Shlomo Zalman Auerbach and Moshe, let's say. So either can I decide myself, and if I go to the rabbi, so then the rabbi, because the rabbi then gets to decide who we go by. I mean, we're not talking about a posek ador here. It's you go to the local rabbi. Do I need to call Rabbi Willig or Schechter or somebody to ask him? Now, how does this work in the real world? Okay, he says, you ask, can you take a heter from this posek and a heter from another posek? In different matters. Basically, can you look? I won't say can you look for a heterim because he's going to deal with that as well. Before we get to that issue, can you shop for heterim, as they say? He's just dealing with the more fundamental question. Is there any problem in taking a heter, so let's say in Hilchos Sukkah from the Mishnah Berurah, but you don't follow the Mishnah Berurah in every case? Which, I repeat, we all do, because every one of us here basically relies on heterim of Rav Moshe Feinstein. Size of the mechitza, that you can go down the list. But we don't follow his chumras, unless you're a Talmud Mufak, because the Jewish community as a whole doesn't follow. And Rav Moshe Feinstein himself says, I know they're not going to follow what I say about time clocks, etc. So he holds, what he explains in the next paragraph is that there's no issue really, as long as there's no contradiction. It's not a problem if you could take a heter, let's say, from the Mishnah Berurah in one area, the Chayam in another area. You're not obligated to follow one sefer completely. Now, if you read what he writes here, it's sort of, he sort of moves into really speaking about what a Talmid Chacham does. because he develops the idea that if you're Talmid Chacham, how you come up when you're learning, that's what you follow. And that's fine. You don't need to follow every. But my question really wasn't about Talmid Chacham. It was about one of the masses, which was he answered properly in the first paragraph. But the principle, I think, is probably still the same. He says that just because you take from one sefer, you're not bound to take everything from that sefer. And he continues. So then the question, it has been solved. Can you take, like, from this posek in Hilchos Shabbos, another posek in Hilchos Sukkah? And he says there's no problem with that, either l'chumra. But then he says, and this is why he doesn't really answer my question. What are we talking about here? If someone goes mitalech meisharim b'darchei halimud, lasos ritzon yitzro. If someone is a serious person in their learning, they're not trying to make a game of this. They're trying to really follow what the halacha should be, and you come to a maskana. So if I'm a learned person, and I'm studying it, then in this case I come to the conclusion that the Mishnah Berurah is right. I'm not the Posek Adora, but I'm a Talmid Chacham. I conclude that the Mishnah Berurah is right. And in another case, it looks like the Chayei Adam makes more sense. He says there's no problem. In that case, you could, as long as you're not looking for heter, but that's what you actually authentically conclude. Fine, you could take the Mishnah Berurah here, you could take the Chayei Adam there. You're not bound to follow one authority all the time. Okay, that makes sense. But my question really wasn't dealing about the Talmudic scholar. I wanted to know about the average person. You don't know what to do. You go online and you see the different shittas where Shlomo Zalman is Meko and Ravad Yosef is Machmir. Can you simply make your own decision here what you're going to do? Or do you then, are you back to square one where I then have to go to the rabbi? Every single time there's a question, you got to go to your local rabbi. And your local rabbi, what's your local rabbi going to do? He's going to look at the same sources. And so is there any room for autonomy? And I don't have the answer for this. Is there any room for autonomy from the typical balabas? Can the balabas simply know that Rav Ovadia says this and Rosh Zalman says this, and they're both reliable rabbis, therefore it's okay to follow whichever one you want? Or in all such cases, you need to approach a rabbi. And the rabbi's not paskening. The rabbi is just going to tell you either what he was told by his rabbi or what he thinks the general minhag is. But what does that mean, the general minhag? I had a friend, he actually wrote this. He's a rabbi, and it's online, or at least it used to be online. He has a whole thing on his website, the shul's website, about gelatin. And he writes that, in America, the practice is not to eat gelatin. That's the post-scheme in America. Therefore, he goes, but in Eretz Yisrael, if you go to Eretz Yisrael, Ravad Yosef and the others have held that gelatin's permissible. So then you can eat it there. My question was, what happens when you're on the airplane? When you're halfway there, you can. But is that what it comes down to? That we're just going to follow what's the general practice is? Or is there and like I said, the real issue, which please email me, let me know what you think, what you've heard. Does the individual, is there any autonomy? Can you simply look and say, Rosh Zalman Auerbach was a great Torah scholar. Rosh Zalman Auerbach, who's greater than him? If he says that this is permissible on Shabbos, okay, you can do it. And then you're going to say, well, wait a second, Ravad Yosef says it's usher. Can a simple person say, well, you know what? Rosh Zalman's big enough for me. And he doesn't really answer that question. What he only answers is about someone who's able to learn, who's convinced. And we're going to see next week, he explains also this idea of shopping for heterim or shopping for chumros. There's plenty of people who always shop for chumros. That's going to be wrong. But I don't have the answer to this question. I was told when I was in high school by Rabbi Parnas, the Rebbe then, he didn't think there was a problem. If you have a dispute between Rav Shlomo Zalman and Rav Moshe Feinstein, he thought it was okay to just decide that you're going to go with Rav Shlomo Zalman. But I don't know if you remember saying that, or he was quite young then. I don't know. I don't know what my sense is that when you deal with the really great ones, there seems to be autonomy. There's less autonomy when you deal with people. You have a great one like Rav Shlomo Zalman and someone on a lesser level. But I could be wrong on this, and it's. I know when you ask Rav Schachter sometimes these questions, he doesn't really answer. He says, Rav Ovadia's matter, Rav Shlomo Zalman's machmir, but Rav Ovadia's meko. And he doesn't really tell you what he thinks. He just says, there's a machmir. I guess that's an answer too. He's giving it into your hands to do with it you wish. But the question remains, and we're going to pick up. We got to continue with this, and then we got to get to the Aruch HaShulchan when he tells me that I'm wrong. that Dafka, he didn't hear this from Hungarians. Wait till you heard in the name of that you don't rely on the Aruch HaShulchan. And then we're going to move on to Rav Menashe Klein. Very relevant because the question I asked him is about voting. When we decide to vote, when we vote for candidates, whoever it is, we have an election coming up in a couple of weeks. Does halacha have anything to say on this? The Jewish values? Does it matter? Is there such a thing that halacha says you have to vote for this or that? Because let's say this one is going to allow abortion and this one's not. And but before we even get to that, we'll see Rav Menashe Klein thinks that everything I was quoting from the internet's wrong because can you even do halacha in English? Can you write it in English? And the whole idea of Torah in the vernacular, we have seen such a revolution in our time. We had Torah in English, the Encino, we had other things, but now we have Mamish Svarim of the highest level. Shulhan Arukh Rabbi Bleich and others, where you don't have anything like them in Hebrew. That, in other words, they're not just summaries; they're actual independent works, which anyone interested in halacha, if he doesn't read English or she, they're really missing out. This is a completely new phenomenon which we haven't had really since medieval times, where the Rambam wrote in Arabic. But remember, when the Rambam was writing in Arabic and others, they were writing in Hebrew letters. So we'll see what Rav Menashe Klein has to say about that. Okay, let me take some questions here and comments. We're moving into interesting areas. Susanna says the court has a Gaia Metag on Vayhi. Yes, it does. Everyone has a Metag on in Breshis, on the Vayhi. But if you look at elsewhere, just look at a concordance. There's plenty of other examples where the word Vayhi appears without the Metag. Then you will see that there's no question it's Vayhi, but the issue is only here. It has the meteg on it because it has the what they call the makef, that hyphen thing at the master. The hyphen thing is important. For example, we use it many times with kamatz katan. So, for instance, kol, the word kol that we pronounce kol. It has a kamatz under it because we're pronouncing it like kamatz katan. If it doesn't have the makef, it has the cholim. There's only one place or two places where you have the word, including one in Tehillim, where kaf vav lamed and kal atzmotai tomarna. That's the pasuk, right? That's always pronounced wrong. It's not kol, it's kal. If you pronounce it like a Sephardi, it's kal. Ashkenaz, but if you pronounce kol, like we all do, kol, whatever, then every time there's a kamatz katan, you should pronounce it the same way. So it's chokhmah, shomra, oznayim. Ellen says the Sephardim didn't follow the local minhag when they moved to Greece. The Sephardim didn't follow, that's right, Ellen, you came with us to Greece, I believe. If not, you came with us everywhere else. The Sephardim didn't follow the minhag when they came to Greece. They didn't follow the minhag when they came to Morocco. They didn't follow the minhag anywhere they went. The Sephardim went, so you could, maybe Chacham Avadia would say they went as a group. They did go as a group, but what happened was the locals in Morocco and also the locals in Greece said that you Sephardim, you're coming into our land, you have to follow our minhagim. And the Sephardim said, forget that. The Sephardim didn't keep God kosher when they came to Morocco. We saw that. The local Moroccans did. And that created that huge dispute. You're absolutely right. The Sephardim did not follow. So the Moroccans today are doing the exact same thing that their foreparents did. Kalman says, did Ravadi ever state his opinion in public shir in his writings? They're in his writings all the time. He's always saying this, but he never really explained, at least I haven't seen, why the Moroccans are really different than the Ashkenazim, which his son did. And he's never explained why the Yemenites should be counted as Sephardim. They accepted the Shulhan Arukh, at least a good portion of them. So I guess that makes them Sephardim, but I get that's what the son says. But the Yemenites don't consider themselves Sephardim. The fact that they accepted the Shulhan Arukh, you have, just because you accept a sock of someone doesn't mean that all of a sudden you're Sephardi. Now you're bound by the Eretz Yisrael. They always kept their own minhagim. Yes, Baruch says rupture reconstruction, the Edot HaMizrach version. You can do that. There's a guy named Joseph Ringel, And he has an article about Rabbi Zinni's critique of Chacham Avad Yosef, which is basically he's trying to do that. But you could do that for every single one of the Sephardic lands. And I think Rabbi Kelman's actually going to do that a bit. He's trying to organize a group of speakers speaking about Sephardic halacha and minhag, and that'll have to be one of the issues. Well, do the Sephardic halacha and minhag really continue, or have they been normatized by Chacham Avad Yosef? So Rabbi Kelman, maybe at the end, you'll announce, I know it's in the planning.
No, next Monday. We're starting next Monday, even though Rabbi Dweck is going to give a 3-part series on Sephardic halacha. The part that isn't finalized yet, we want to continue that with, as we discuss culture halacha from other communities around the world. But next Monday morning, 11 a.m., Rabbi Dweck will be giving a beginning of a 3-part series on Sephardic halacha. But back to you. We'll talk about that later.
Okay, someone privately emails me. There's a chazan, one of the old Chazan Baal Koreh from the Hirsch Minyan in Washington Heights. There's tapes of him on Dartmouth. I signed up, but they haven't approved me yet. He says the Shva in Vaychi is pronounced Vayechi. And also in the Mordechai Breuer Tanakh. I don't know what that means, the Mordechai Breuer Tanakh. The Mordechai Breuer Tanakh, you can't hear, you can only see. The fact that there's a Gaia there is irrelevant. Everyone knows there's a Gaia there. But the Minchat Shai and others tell us that even though the Gaia is there, you still pronounce it as the Shva Nach. But that if you're saying that that maybe is the Frankfurt tradition to also pronounce it as Vayechi, Vayehi. By the way, it's the same thing as Vayechi. It would be the same issue. I don't know, but look at all the tikkunim. I have yet to find a tikkun that has it, but I'd like to see. I looked in Heidenheim. Heidenheim, I thought he sometimes has interesting things. Heidenheim does not comment on whether that's Shvana or Shvanach. Howard says, individual Moroccans who came before a group adopted the position of Shulchan Arukh with 80 Tatarat Neder to go back to customs of Moroccan Jews. According to Chacham Avad Yosef, they're not allowed to go back to the practices of Moroccan Jews. So it's not, Tatarat Nederim doesn't help. They don't, they're not allowed to, because then if Moroccans came as a group and were a complete community, that's like a B'di Avad situation. He does not hold you're allowed to. Do any of Rav Avadia's children take positions contrary to Rav Avadia? Excellent question, and the answer is yes. I'm going to show you who it is, who I never had an opportunity to have any, hold on a second. This is an interesting story here. Let me show you on the screen here. Oops, here. It was a sad story. You can see here Rav Yaakov Yosef. He predeceased his father, Rav Avad Yosef. They said he was the greatest Talmid Chacham of all the children. But I'm curious. Well, you can read up later. He broke with his father. He became very right-wing politically. He came out publicly against his father's positions. He aligned himself with Rav Mordechai Eliyahu. You know what that means. Chacham Avad Yosef and Mordechai Eliyahu did not get along. He aligned himself with Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, and he published a sefer. Well, he died, unfortunately. He used to give shiurim every night, but they only published one of his sefarim in which he criticizes his father's rulings. I have the sefer. I don't have it here. I have it in Scranton. So he, by the end of his life, Rav Yaakov Yosef was following the old Iraqi approach, Ben Ishchai and other things. He had a break with his father. In the last years of his life, they had a reconciliation of sorts. And as I said, he became sick and he predeceased his father. But he's the only one that didn't follow the family. It's a family business, and that they have all this Sfarim. Rav David Yosef has all these volumes called Halacha Brura, which are not as popular as Yalkut Yosef, but are full of learning. And it's he disagrees a few times with his brother, like what bracha make on Bamba and others, but it's the same basic approach. Rav Avram Yosef, who I quoted, has never published any Sfarim. I don't know why. Thanksgiving 2019 was also Rosh Chodesh. Kalman says the Chavetz Chaim's son Reb Leib in his biography writes that he wrote parts of the Mishnah Berurah and provides an example of a contradiction, in which he resolves by saying he paskin one way, whereas father's paskin the opposite way. Correct. the son of the Chavetz Chaim explains that the reason there's contradictions, and he gives an example, is because he helped his father write it. And in one section, he wrote it, it's Hilchos Shabbos actually, and another section, his father wrote it. That explains the contradiction. Howard says, can we rely on Chai Adam or any other sefer in an instance where every other posek argues on a specific issue? Rabbi Rasabi says yes. Rabbi Rasabi says that these are they're reliable posek, so it doesn't matter. But he says you'll learn that this is not the general practice. So if it's not the general practice, and then you learn that, can you still continue relying on it? His language is. You could ask the same question. Can you rely on Ramosha Feinstein? What if everyone disagrees? I think we assume you can. What he says is the exact language. Here, I want to show you. Where is it? I don't know where it is now. Yeah, this is what he says. He says you're allowed to do like any of these books, as long as you don't know that. Well, he says that the minhag's not like them. So I take back what I said. He says that if you can take any book you want, but then if the general practice is not like them, you shouldn't do it. But until then, it's fine. You can rely on it. But once you learn that the general practice is not, but I don't know. It's a difficult thing because where do you take this? So. What does that mean? When does the general practice? Do we say today that the general practice is not like Ramosha Feinstein's, therefore his heter that you got from him or that he gave is no longer reliable? I think everyone agrees that there comes a point where that is the case. I mean, eventually there comes a point where even the greatest rabbis, their views are no longer binding anymore, or are no longer reliable for us. We can't be relying on them. But that's what they wanted to say about Ramosha and the Schnapps. That we can't rely on his opinion anymore, that you need hashgacha on it. I don't know when, it was pretty quick to say it. But look, we can't rely on, just because a posek said something 100 years ago, doesn't mean that if everyone, otherwise we'd all be lighting Ashkenazim, I should say. Sephardim have a different approach. But the Aruch HaShulchan, he said that you could turn on lights on Yom Tov. And in his day, plenty of people did. It's very hard to make the case today that just because the Aruch HaShulchan says it, we can do it, because everyone has rejected it, and he didn't really understand how electricity works. Baruch says, the learned Baruch, among Litvish Rabbanim, the Aruch HaShulchan was favored. Rosh Yeshiva preferred Mishnah Berurah. Rav Aaron Kotler in particular tried to spread the idea that Mishnah Berurah is the code to follow. He would carry it around with him. Yes, and there's famous photographs of him carrying it. But Rabbanim, Baruch tells us, because Rabbanim, they're Shtut Rabbanim, they would follow the Aruch HaShulchan. And the two works are quite different. Obviously, as he points out, the Aruch HaShulchan is more conceptual. The Mishnah Berurah, he says it's Mishnah Berurah. No, Mishnah Berurah. Good question. Why shouldn't it be Mishnah Berurah? Maybe it should be, but we all say Mishnah Berurah. That's not a conceptual work, although we have in the Be'er Halacha, perhaps, but in the Mishnah Berurah, it's more of just looking at collecting the different sources, different things, more chumras, etc., etc. Or as some have said, one does not want a posek who's a tzaddik gomer, he'll be too machmir. And a posek was always a communal rav, not the Rosh Yeshiva who did not deal with the average person. On Shabbos, in what I was reading, one of the Gedolim, I have a collection, hasn't been published yet. I don't know if it ever will, but one of the great Rabbanim has put together a collection of stories. Now, most of the stories are complete bubble noises, and they're not true. He even talks about how David Ben-Gurion came with his wife Paula to Berlin, and Rabbi Yechiak of Weinberg had a whole conversation with them, and then Rabbi Yechiak of Weinberg married them in Berlin. It's such nonsense. Right after Yom Tov, I looked online. David Ben-Gurion married Paula, the name Paula should say something, in New York City in 1917. So, I mean, but he has a number of things that he heard personally, and one of them says exactly what Rabbi Kelman said, that the reason they didn't hold by the Chavetz Chaim was because he was the Tzaddik Hador. And the Tzaddik Hador can't be the Posek Hador. Well, Ramosha, Shmuel says, was Rosh Yeshiva, he would probably consider similar to the Aruch HaShulchan, since he was always involved in Pasuk Halacha. And Ramosha is known as the Posek. Even though he wanted to be the Rosh Yeshiva, he's known as the Posek, and he was a Shtut Rav in Russia. Today we have Rosh Yeshiva who've never been rabbis and have never dealt with, first of all, some never dealt with Psak Halacha to begin with. We have Rosh Yeshiva who don't know about Psak. That's not what they focus on. But some have never, literally, Rosh Yeshiva have never dealt with Balabatim, average type of regular people. So they're in a yeshiva world environment their entire life. And obviously that's going to be a different type of rabbi. Yes, Howard says the excellent biography in the Aruch HaShulchan by Eitam Henkin, Hashem Yikom Damo, he deals with his grandfather's approach to the Aruch HaShulchan. And it's the only academic work on the Aruch HaShulchan. That is correct. He even has an article in which he deals with the Rabbi Lior's piece that I mentioned. Howard says if you're a Talmud or Moshe Feinstein, you need to follow his psakim. I think the general assumption is if you're a close Talmud, you do. Chumrah and Lakula. But we know that people who are not such close Talmidim, the assumptions, at least my impression, has always been that you don't need to. But yes, close Talmidim, you're supposed to follow everything. Unless the Rav tells you, this is just my personal chumrah. Close Talmidim, you're supposed to, when I say close, I mean ones who would ask all their shilas. Most of us are not like that. We go out there and we're asking whatever rabbi comes to town. You have a question, you ask him. We have in my town. What's the whole idea in my town? Like every other month, Shachtar will come and ask the rabbi. What's the point of that? He comes in and it just asks questions. That's it. So now all of a sudden I ask a question, what do I do on Pesach? Does that mean now that every single shilah I need to ask them? No one thinks that. But yet you bring these rabbis into town and all of a sudden it's you ask the posik. And no one assumes. But yes, if you're a Talmud Muvak, you're supposed to follow everything, Chumrah and Kula. But I can tell you from personal experience, including I knew Rabbi Felder, who was as close to Talmud Muvak Ramosha as anyone was, or Rav Aaron Felder, that even Talmud Muvak, there will be a time, because first of all, it depends. I think we need to distinguish Talmud Muvak. Someone like Rabbi Felder, he was a great enough of a Talmud that he could come up with some of his own ideas. Rav Shechter is a Talmud Muvak of Soloveitchik, but he disagrees with him. But I think that for one who's not at the level to be a lamdin, at the level to be a posek, I do think if you study in someone's yeshiva for many years and you're a Talmud Muvak, I think in that case you would have to follow, I think, L'chumra and L'kula. But again, I already said that Moshe himself said that they're not going to follow me on time clocks. Rosh Zalman Auerbach said that you're supposed to make ha'etz on the chocolate. And he himself said, no, but I know no one's going to listen to me. And even his own Talmidim don't listen to him because Rav Shlomo Zalman said, I realize this is against the minhag. But I think in general, yes, you should follow. And Shmuley says that Rav Moshe's son David occasionally disagrees with his father. But okay, that's not the case I'm talking about, though. Rav David's a posek in and of himself. He's allowed to disagree with his father. But if you're just a regular sort of Talmud, I do think you have to follow everything. That's the tradition. Why are Persians considered to be Sephardim? Yes, why are Iraqis considered to be Sephardim? They're the Edot Mizrach and the Sephardim. Sephardim means Spanish, have all been put together. Rav Shimon Ba'adani is on Moetzes Shas, so there must be Sephardim then. He is a Yemenite. They put him on it. And finally, did Rav Ephraim Greenblatt ever disagree with Rav Moshe? Well, we had the case where it's clear to me at least he disagreed with Rav Moshe when he said that for Shabbos you can invite people, for Yom Tov, for the Seder, and other times he said you can invite them. And he went with Rav Shlomo Zalman in that case, and he knew what his Rebbe held.
Even if they'll try.
I don't know if that's a matter of Ephraim Greenblatt disagreeing with Rav Moshe or simply saying I'm not going to follow Rav Moshe, or I never asked him why he didn't follow. He might have said that in this matter, I think the logic of Rav Shlomo Zalman's better. I don't know, but Rav Ephraim Greenblatt is more of a Talmud Muvak even than Rabbi Felder. There's more tshuvo to Rabbi Greenblatt than anyone in Igros Moshe, and but he's a bar hachi, as they say. So I don't know why in that case he didn't, but he did in that case at least. I don't know if there's any other cases where he disagreed with Rav Moshe. Okay, thank you all very much. If Rabbi Kelman wants to have some final words, we got good stuff. Stay tuned for next week, God willing. Good stuff coming.
Thank you. No, just this week, of course, Benny Gesundheit tomorrow, Sefer Tilim, continuing our series. Wednesday, I mentioned Mark Trencher. I sent that out earlier today, who's done the surveys on the modern Orthodox world. 6 surveys, very fascinating information. He'll be speaking Wednesday morning at 11 a.m. Thursday evening, we're going to restart with a new section of the Torah, beginning to our rotating Parsha share. I'm going to kick it off on Thursday night. That's please God 8:30. And as I mentioned, on Sunday, Rabbi Liebtag is starting from Lord Balfour to from Cyrus to Lord Balfour. The books on Tanakh and by Cheney, and we'll be doing that beginning on Sunday. And Monday, as I mentioned, Rabbi Dweck will be beginning a 3-part series on Sephardic halakha. We have a few more. We're going to be doing archaeology and halakha, a whole bunch of things. We'll send out a broader email later. But basically, next week, every day, we'll be having classes at 11 a.m. usual, and a couple evenings. So stay forward, lots of Torah to learn, Baruch Hashem, and we look forward to seeing you in good health. And thank you very much. Okay, everybody, have
Good night, everyone.
good night, and be well. Thank you.